Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Chris Wright. I'm a landscape photographer working out of Granada. Now, a couple of weeks ago I did a lightning visit to England, to Shropshire, to visit relatives, and I made a video about a shoot that we did during that time, and I mentioned that I would do a breakdown of the processing steps that were used in one particular photograph. So this is the photograph, and what I'm trying to do here is to compare the masking capabilities of three software applications. So we're looking at Adobe Lightroom, we're looking at DxO PhotoLab, and we're looking at Affinity Photo. Now, this might be quite a chunk to bite off all in one go, so the chapters are clearly indicated in the description down below. So you can just skip to the one that you want to see, or watch, two that you want to compare and see how the tools stack up across the devices. Now, as an introduction, what I will say is that each of the softwares uses a different kind of paradigm. So there are similarities, but under the covers they're really quite different. And broadly, what these differences are is that DxO PhotoLab uses what they call U-point technology. So it's you point at the spot on the photograph that you want to work on, and you apply a mask, choosing from a selection of mask types. And that is automatically bundled, if you like, into the photograph. You don't see any layers or any sense of stacking. There is really not much else to it. It's quite, once you get used to it, it's extremely intuitive to use. However, it does have some weaknesses compared to the Adobe Lightroom AI-assisted masking capabilities. And for the sake of this video, I'm treating Adobe Lightroom as being the standard against which everyone else is judged effectively. And I think that reflects market share as much as it reflects anything else. So I have my own preferences. However, let's, for the moment at least, treat Adobe Lightroom as being the market leader, and then we're going to go to DxO PhotoLab, and then we're going to go to Affinity Photo after that. So it's the same edit with the same brief. We're recreating it in all of the different softwares. Some of it is straightforward. Other bits are far from straightforward. So let's have a look and see how we get on. Let's have a look and see how we get on with Adobe Lightroom first off. Okay, so here we are in the Adobe Lightroom. We've got a clean version of this raw file in the library, and let's just have a look at that. So pretty flat. We can see that the light sources are this big window here. So we've got light coming in diagonally across, but also we've got light coming in from the other side here. And we can see that half of this, I'm going to say tree, is lit up, but the other half isn't. The tabletop here is quite well lit. Similarly, the top of this pew and the back of this pew here. What are the things of interest in this picture? Well, the light up here looks a little flat, and yet it is lit up along this edge here. Similarly, the light hanging from the ceiling here is quite clearly picking up the light, but it's not obvious in this photograph. So what I want to do with this is to bring out the light that's striking these objects, not massively, but enough to breathe some life into the picture. It was taken in very dark settings, so we're on 6400 ISO here, and the picture is quite noisy. So if we blow that up, you can see pretty clearly the noise in the picture. So in Lightroom, we've got some options in the Develop module. So let's move to the Develop module here, and we can have another quick look at this. Now, what's immediately happening is we're blowing the highlights and crushing some of the blacks, and we don't really want to do that. So the first thing I would do is take out the blown highlights. Okay, and probably lift the shadows a little. Let's just bring it away from there, and the blacks, and just shift it away slightly from the left-hand side. Now, part of the good thing about this photograph is the shadow and the darkness. So we're treading a fine line here, so we don't want to, we don't want to lift it right up, and that will just show you just how much noise there is in the picture. But we want to maintain a sort of balance between the attractive shadows and what I hope will prove to be sort of stronger, warmer light. Now, there's a couple of selection headaches here. This one, not really a problem. We could do this with a brush, no problem. This one is somewhat more problematic because of the darkness. So we can see that it's lighting up the ring here, but it's very much blended in with the background. Similarly, the points halfway along the chains, all reflecting light. We've got a glass element here, and the brass cup at the bottom is reflecting light from both sides, so from this window and that. So this is going to be difficult to select, and this is where I think that the AI-assisted selection tools in Lightroom are going to come into their own. The other part of it is this tree. I'm calling it a tree because I just don't know what else to call it. I have no idea what the symbolism of this thing is, but it looks like a tree, and so from this point on it will be referred to as the tree. Is half lit. Now we need to do something about that, and I think that's going to be a matter of experimentation, because the shadow falls basically in a diagonal across this, and the shadow is caused by this here, which paradoxically is lit from here, but it's causing this shadow to fall from the lighting here. So let's get on with it and see what we've got in the kit box. So I can add a new mask, and let's see how we get on with these. Now I'm going to try the object on this one. Okay, and immediately we've got actually a pretty good selection. Now that was quick. So let's bring up the highlights on that. Notice that I'm not bringing up the whole exposure on this. We really want to accentuate the highlights, and that brings a much more subtle glow to that light, and that's now looking pretty much as I wanted it to look. Can perhaps warm that up a little bit, but yeah, we can come back to that. Now the next one is this here. I'm going to go up to 100% to deal with this. Now this is problematic. We've got a slight compositional issue here because this tag, which I didn't notice at the time, is overlapping with the candlestick. But no matter, this is the area that we want to highlight. So let's see how we can do this and keep it separate. So we'll go for another selection. Let's try it with the object selection tool first of all. Okay, that's not a bad selection actually. So again, let's go for the highlights. Okay, and you can just see this beginning to glow a little bit. So quite dull there. Just bring it up a tiny little bit. And that, I think, is going to do the job. And let's do the do these with okay, that's not quite so good, but let's have a look, because all we're interested in is that highlight. There we go. That's not so bad. And we'll do the same with the other one. I think I might leave the last one. So highlights again. So that's now catching the light in a way that I quite like. And these bits here, and that's come out actually more by accident than design, but that is almost perfect. So let's bring those up. Yeah, that's just catching it. And one more. Better. And again, just make that, bring it up there. Okay, and I think that's probably good enough for this. So let's go back to there, and we'll come out of the, and you can see immediately that these things are now beginning to draw your attention. It's making it's improved the picture quite a lot. Now, this one is a much more difficult selection. Let's have a look at this. We go back to 100% so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so we don't want to make these reds and greens any brighter. We want to make the white woodwork brighter, but we only want to do it from about here. You can see this diagonal here. So let's have a look and see how we might do that. Now, a selection brush isn't going to do it because we've got a lot of crossing, very fine twigs. It's blending in with the wall quite badly, and with this sort of lattice work here. That is going to be impossible to select with a brush. So there's a thing that Lightroom has which is called intersection, and intersection is very, very powerful because it allows you to work with two different types of mask, and the area that is selected is the area where those two masks intersect. And you need to have a little bit of lateral thinking about this. So what we're going to do is to select with a brush and then intersect with a luminance value or with a color, whichever one works better. So if we brush this whole area out, go here, and we'll just, okay, now I'm not doing my brush setting. It's feathered to 100%, the flow is at 57. So this has got to be quite a subtle change, which is why I'm leaving the flow where it is, because we don't want this to jump out of the picture. We just want it to help with the general warming up of things. So I'm going to intersect with this. So let's have a look. Intersect mask with, and what I'm going to do is choose a color range, I think. Now the danger here is that we might also get a bit turned up in the lattice work, but that may not matter. So there is the selections. Okay, so we can refine that, and now we've got a selection on the twigs and not so much on the background. So let's have a look and see what happens when we alter that. Okay, so we've actually got quite a good selection. We're picking up some of this background here, but I'm not too bothered about that because that was lit in any case. So I think really that's pretty much job done on that. So intersection is a very useful tool indeed. If you think about it, you need to have a little bit of lateral thinking, but in terms of you know, doing difficult selections where there's perhaps a tree across a sky, you want to select the tree and not the sky. Intersection is the way to go with that. Very useful. Okay, let's go back and fit here. That's, if we go back into the main thing, that's now looking pretty much as I wanted it to look. The last thing I'm going to do is remove the noise, and this, I think we can probably, with this amount of noise, it's not, interestingly, it's not color noise, it's luminance noise. So I think that the default setting will probably do a decent job. Let's have a look. Okay, let's bring this up to 100%. And yeah, it's done a great job. Okay, so that's the edit finished. Let's have a look and see. We'll just get rid of the symbols. Okay, so yeah, you can see this is much warmer. Let's have a look and see what it looked like before we did the edit. There you go, much flatter. And it's these small edits that breathe life into a picture. This is not a broad brush stroke. This is very small, finessed edits. So before, after. Yeah, so that was Adobe Lightroom. That's pretty much recognized as being the market leader in AI-assisted masking. And as you can see, they work pretty well. You have to use some lateral thinking in order to work out how you do the more difficult or the more complicated selections, and often this is a way of you know, work out what it is, where it is that you want to get to, and work out how you're going to get there in steps before you actually start doing the edit. Once you get your head around the concept of intersection, which does crop up again with Affinity Photo, interestingly enough, it starts to fall into place and you can do quite complicated selections quite easily. Okay, so with that in mind, let's have a look at DxO PhotoLab 8. Okay, here we are in DxO PhotoLab. Now this is the same identical picture, and we're going to see if we can create the same identical edit or something that's very close to the same edit. Now if we look at this, we've just to recap in case you've come in at this point in the video, we've got light source here, which is shining down, so this is creating this very strong diagonal here. And we've also got a light source on the right, which is lighting across. So this is catching light from both directions. This is catching light primarily from here. And there's this rather strange phenomenon here where this is sort of kind of cut off on a diagonal. Now, I refer to this twig thing as a tree, just because that is henceforth to be known as the tree in this demo. So what are we trying to achieve with this? We want to make more of the highlights that the light is bringing. Now, we don't want to do that by blowing out the lights here or increasing the light source here, but you can see where it's subtly lit the light up in the roof up here. We can see that light's reflecting off various points in this hanging light here, and there's some very nice sort of shade and light on these small points. We've got a glass piece here, and I've just noticed one thing that's quite interesting actually, is that in this PhotoLab is showing me a great deal of colour noise, which didn't seem to be present in the Lightroom version. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but anyway, be that as it may. So we want the highlights here on the glass, we want the highlights on this bowl, and remember it's been lit from both sides, so here and from here. A little highlight there. We've got a compositional error here, which was my fault, but the tassel is sort of interfering with the candlestick here, but let's not worry too much about that. This is really, this is a demo picture, it's not for the portfolio. And what we want to avoid here is lighting up this entire area and making the greens and the reds more vivid. We don't want that. And we want to get rid of the noise. So let's have a look and see how we would achieve this. So we'll go into the Customize view first. I'll just kill off the ribbon at the bottom. And what I want to do is, I'm going to do the denoising bit later. So in my presets, I'm going to choose optical corrections only. And as I did with Lightroom, I'm going to pass over the general alterations. We'll actually do those last, just to bring the picture up, but there's nothing very complex in there. We're going to go straight for the local adjustments, and we've got choices here. We've got control points, control lines, we've got linear gradients, luminosity mask, hue mask, auto mask, ordinary mask, drawn mask, mask, and the eraser. So we don't have any AI capability here, but these masks are still quite powerful. So let's start off with a control point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the control point on that lit part of this. And I'm just going to drag it up because we've got there. Okay, so we'll go with that, and if we change the selection ever so slightly to get it off of here, it's lighting up there, so change that a bit. We want it on the light, but we are unavoidably picking up some of the background. But let's have a look and see. We're going to use the same strategy. I'm not going to go with exposure because that's too much of a blunt object. Instead, I'm going to go with highlights. and a little bit on the mid-tones. That's not too bad. Okay, quite like that. All right, so, and let's repeat again what we've done here. We want to light up the pendant. Okay, what I want to do here is to try to select, and I'm going to try and do it with a luminosity mask, see how that works, because the control point is just not doing it. So let's have a look with the luminosity mask. If I choose the bit there that's lit up, okay, that seems to have made quite a decent selection. Okay, and what we want to do obviously is remove the luminosity mask from every other area apart from the hanging pendant. I'm just going to erase it then. Okay, so from here, don't want the luminosity mask there, don't want it here. We just want a very subtle arrangement here. Okay, and let's have a look and see how that works. Highlight that, there we go. That's better, I think. Let's have a look at that in more magnification. Yeah, that's brought up the lighting much better. That's nice. And actually, I got to say that I didn't select the chain when I did this in Lightroom, so this could be seen as something of an improvement, actually, this one. But it's really user error. I didn't do that properly. All right, so let's go back to fit. And now we want the tricky selection down here. And this is not going to be totally straightforward. Okay, so we're going to use another luminosity mask here. I don't think we could compare them, but I don't think that the control point is going to do it. But I'll tell you what, let's have a look and see if it does it. Now, the power of the control point is that it will sample the tonal characteristics of the area that you drop the control point. So if I go there, and if I make that control point bigger, okay, we can see it's actually not done a bad job of picking out the whites. And actually, if we adjust here, that's probably not bad. That's probably comparable with the Lightroom version. So let's see, if we just take the highlights up, yeah, that's quite responsive. Okay, and I think that's quite good. I actually quite like that. All right, so let's go back to the view. I'm going to go back to the here. I'm going to go back to the color boost, and I'm just going to bring that color temperature up just a touch. Okay, and really I think that's pretty much where we want to be. Let's just have a look at the contrast. We're going to have a little bit more contrast in there. I could do this with conventional dodging and burning, which might actually be better, but let's just leave it at that in terms of comparing it with the other tools. So I think with PhotoLab, I mean, clearly there is a difference, and you have to go with the flow, really. Ultimately, we've got the result we wanted, and arguably the result on the pendant is arguably better, but I do think that was more user error than anything else. Okay, so the final piece of the jigsaw here is to adjust the noise, or to do the noise, and for that I think we go into detail here, turn on denoise. What I'm going to do is bring out the loop, and you can see that it has done a pretty good job. There's still a bit of noise here, so let's try another algorithm. Better. This is the most bothersome one, so let's go with that. That's much better. And let's go for okay, and that's better still. So we've got a lot more detail in here now. You can even see the dirt on this glass there, and it's brought out the details of the statuette quite nicely. So this part of it, I think, is definitely a win for PhotoLab. The retrieval of detail is quite fantastic, and in this type of picture, that's very good. Okay, so that's looking good. The only thing that remains to be done is to compare before and after. So before, very flat. After, slightly warmer, slightly crisper. We've got the light nailed. I think that's turned out really well, particularly this area here. And again, it shows that with the sets of, you have to work with the tools that you have, and this invariably results in some lateral thinking. So it's perfectly okay to use a luminosity mask and then delete 90% of the mask, for example. You just have to work with what you have in front of you. Okay. Yeah, so that was DxO PhotoLab 8, and as I described it earlier, you literally just point at the screen and you apply your mask. Now, the thing that I didn't say explicitly in the demo is that the way that this works is where you drop the center of the mask, it samples the pixels around that spot, so that it will apply the correction to the pixels that match the area that you drop it in. So you can effectively mitigate against the corrections being applied evenly around the whole circle by dropping it, as I did in there, in a particular place that matches the nature of the pixels that I want to change. Now, this is, in these days of AI and so on, this is beginning to look a little bit outdated, but it does work. There's no question about that. I think the results that we got from this edit were in the same ballpark as the Adobe Lightroom. And to an effect, I mean, this does reflect my familiarity with both of these applications. I've used both of these applications for many, many years, and indeed been engaged in a bit of a sort of ongoing struggle to decide which one, if either I will eventually ditch. But taking that to one side, I think you can get very good results with DxO PhotoLab. It will be interesting to see, because we are coming up into new release season. It'll be interesting to see what's coming down the line there. So let's now have a look at Affinity Photo. Now, Affinity Photo is an interesting history in that it was clearly modelled on Photoshop. So it uses a lot of the same paradigms as Photoshop. It doesn't have an effective built-in noise reduction tool. However, what I've done, as you will see in the demo, is I pass it through DxO Pure Raw to do the lens corrections and the noise reduction before I do the edit. So we're kind of jumping out of sequence compared to the other ones. We're now dealing with a photograph that has been extensively pre-processed, in this case in Pure Raw. However, the rest of the logic is more or less the same. So let's jump into Affinity Photo. So here we are with our pre-processed. The noise has been removed from this picture. We've got slightly better clarity. It's a better starting point than we had in either of the other two options. And what we're going to do is to use layer-based processing in order to build up the adjustments that we want. So each layer will be largely transparent except for the area that we want to work on. Okay, I'm going to use the AI selections to do this. And first we need to highlight the layer. Then we need to choose the object selection, and we're going to go with that. Okay, it's done a reasonably good job of doing that, and let's add an adjustment. So we'll go with shadows and highlights. And let's drop the shadows a little bit and raise the highlights a little bit. Okay, we can come back and so that looks fine. So we'll leave that one at that. Okay. Okay, so for this second selection, what I'm going to do is we're going to use an intersection. So this is very similar to the way that this works in Lightroom. What we want to do is to select the lighter element of the body of the tree. We want to exclude the red and the green dots. So I think my first impulse will be to select based on the hue. What we're going to do here is to select based on a sampled colour, and then with an intersection I'm going to try to remove all of the other bits. So what we've got is that these colours, so this is subtly picking up the green, but the background cloth is also green. So we've, you know, if I select here, we have definitely got a bit of an issue. But let's go with it and see what we can do. So select, I'm going with sampled colour. Okay, and I'm going to go with that as my sampled colour. If I go to red, there it is. So I don't want that, I want that. Okay, so that's picked up as we expected a lot of the other areas. So I'm going to do an intersect. So we select the freehand selection tool, choose the intersect mode, and let's just go . Okay, and that's left us with a pretty decent outline of the tree. And now let's apply that as a adjustment, and I'm going to use brightness and contrast in this point. There we go. And let's turn off the marching ants so we can see what we're doing. There we go. And you can see that we're picking up the areas there. We don't want too much contrast. I think let's try this with a different we've got our, make sure we've got our pixel selection. Yes, we have. Go with adjustments. We're doing shadows and highlights. Instead, turn off the pixel selection so we can see what we're doing. Yeah, so we're getting the highlights quite well. Take shadows down a bit. Push those highlights up. Let's have a look at this in normal size. And that's done a reasonably good job. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because you can see that. So that's done a pretty good job. I mean, we've demonstrated the intersect mode, which works in exactly the same way as it does in Lightroom. And again, this is a good example of lateral thinking, because what we're trying to do here is to isolate the tree. And I think within the context of this picture, I think we've done that quite effectively. Another way of approaching this could have been to go on a tonal range and again do the intersect, so we're isolating the tree as much as possible, but I'm quite happy with that selection. Okay, what I want to do now is to create a new selection on this light fitting, and this is a little bit tricky. So we're going to check the mode is still the same, because we're going to use the object selection tool again, and that's not bad. That's I think we'll probably go with that. So there's our selection. So we're going with the adjustment again, and we're going with the shadows and highlights again, and this time turn the pixels off, and so we can see exactly what we're doing. And actually that's pretty good. So I take that up to about there, just so we've got these ones catching the light, and that's catching the light. That one perhaps not so much, but yeah, leave the shadows as are. That I think I'm quite relatively happy with. Now, one thing I would say is this has been a little bit sort of less exact, but again, you have to work with the tools that you've got. So things to watch out for in Affinity is the mask view, very sensitive. It's worth turning off the marching ants so that you can really get a good view of what's going on. Now, I think for me, I'm going to take this back to normal size. And I think what we're going to do here is to add like a global adjustment. Yeah, we're just going to warm it up a tiny little bit. So go with the white balance adjustments. This is global now. Yeah. And just really a fraction. I think that's fine. We'll go with that. Okay, so let's just turn these off one by one. Okay, so there's your before. This is our light in the ceiling. Now we can always come back to this, so if we click there, let's give that a little bit more really, okay, that's that one. That's the tree, so we can see we're happy enough with that. That's worked really well. And finally we've got the hanging ornament, so that's off, that's on, and then our white balance change there, and that's perfect. I like it, it's worked really well. Good, so let's get back to the studio. Yeah, so that was Affinity Photo, and I think what we've demonstrated more than anything else is that each of these applications can do the job that we've asked them to do. There are differences between them, yes, and a lot is down to personal taste. I think probably Lightroom edges it. PhotoLab is, the tools are quite intuitive once you get to know them, but as I said, I think it is getting to be a little bit clunky given the alacrity with which other applications, including Affinity, are moving towards artificial intelligence. And I think really now that the game has changed sufficiently that AI is the thing that everyone is going to aim for. And whether we like it or not, you know, we can make decisions, whereas a year ago even, it was a case of I'm not going to endorse this application because they're using AI and the sort of morals, the ethics behind sky swapping and so on and so forth. It's like I have never swapped a sky, and I would never think of swapping a sky. I think for me that's an ethical decision, and I'm not terribly keen on the way that Adobe are galloping full tilt towards an AI future. But it's not going to really affect me as a landscape photographer. I do what I do. And I'm going to continue doing what I do much in the way that I've always done it. Now, having said that, yes, I've used artificial intelligence aided selection tools in both Lightroom and Affinity. I use artificial intelligence in the noise reduction in DxO PhotoLab. So it's there, it's part of the landscape, and I think now it's a question of being decisive around what we stand for and how we want our work to be perceived and how we want to do our work. And, you know, there are still people using film and doing everything the real old-fashioned way. So I think there's, I think we're going to be living in a universe, if you like, where there are multiple levels and multiple ways of doing things, and all of them are photography. And so I think we sort of, we make our own path and we keep to it. So this was never about competition or seeing which one has the best tool set. I think the tool sets, give or take, are more or less on the same page. It's give and take. You need to do a little bit of extra work with a couple of the apps, but then you look at Adobe and they're a multi-billion-dollar organization. DxO are not, Affinity Photo are not. It's up to us to make informed decisions and go with the application that we're most comfortable with. So that being said, thanks for watching, guys. It's been a very long video, I know, and I'll be interested to see what how many of you watch all of it and how many choose to watch individual bits. But I think my decision on this was, seeing as I'm doing the same edit, I didn't want to make it into 3 videos because that just makes for a very boring channel. You've got a month full of identical content. So I wanted to change the way that we did stuff. So next week we're going to have a completely different video. Some of you will probably remember that I did a video a couple of months ago, or 6 weeks ago, about Ansel Adams and the zone system, and I've done quite a lot of research in the background over the last month, and I wanted to return to doing something around that. So perhaps that will be the video for next week. No promises at this point, but rest assured there will be another video next week. So if you're subscribed to the channel, then give us a like. If you're not subscribed, do subscribe to the channel and give us a like if you've enjoyed the video or if it's been useful. Thanks very much, guys. We'll see you next week with another video. Bye.